Een heel goede middag allemaal, welkom. Ik hoop dat jullie het scherm hebben geopend in browser. Dat zou heel handig zijn, want dat betekent dat ik jullie vragen kan zien. En dat is handig, want dan kan ik ze beantwoorden. Want wat ik ga doen is, ik ga niks nieuws vertellen. De chat aan de rechterkant kunnen jullie gebruiken om vragen te stellen. En op basis van jullie vragen zal ik proberen, zo goed en zo kwaad als dat kan, jullie van antwoorden te voorzien. So, ladies and gentlemen, should you have any questions, please feel free to share them with me through the chat you'll find in the as part of the live stream. You do have to open the link in browser, probably on a computer. So if you're watching this stream on your phone right now, that's not going to get you anywhere. Or maybe it is, but then you can't really ask me anything. And this is a question-based live stream. So until we've got any questions, I'll be here waiting. You know where to find me. In the meantime, I'll be showing you Freitag's Pyramid, just to give you some inspiration as to what to expect on the upcoming test, what it is we want you to be able to analyze as part of your novel of choice assignment. Thank you, Freek. Freek says that he's using his phone to watch the live stream and he can still type in any questions. So that's good news. Do you have any questions then, Freek? That would be even better. Brilliant. Regarding the novel of choice, Thijs, like so I hope you know, you have to be able to analyze the plot structure of it, which means that you have to be able to tell me what you as a reader learned from the exposition. What is it that we need to know about the main character, about his background story, about the setting, place and time in which the story takes place, in order to understand the book. And if the setting changes throughout the story, that's going to be important as well. You need to know what marked the start of the story itself. So, for example, I think the example I used in class was the example of the Hunger Games. The minute Primrose is selected, and God, I forgot her name, but she volunteers as tribute, that's the minute the story really hits off. And that's the minute we as readers, or in case of the movie, viewers, we start to wonder, how is this going to end? Is she going to survive? Is she going to live? Which is then the foremost question that we start asking ourselves. And it's this question that will be answered during the climax of the story. And everything in between the inciting incident and the climax, is called rising action. That's where the author builds up tension and makes you as a reader think, oh no, everything's going to go wrong and she's going to die, and then she doesn't, and she's stung by a bee, and then she's saved by a package that somebody sends her. All of that is the author building up tension and making you wonder even more whether or not Katniss, that's her name, is going to survive. So that's what you need to be able to, and furthermore, you need to be able to describe the main character, of course. You need to know the difference between a round and a flat character, and you need to know what characterizes each character. So what are their character traits? And please, please, please note that physical traits, so whether somebody's tall or short or skinny or muscular or fat or whatever, big, as we say, that's not a character trait. Being greedy is a character trait. Being friendly, being jealous, being shy, those are character traits. Emotions are not character traits either. So being happy is not a character trait. So you need to be able to describe both the story in terms of plot structure, and you need to describe the main characters of the book. Amelie, questions on Alpen magazine. Part of it will be multiple choice, part of it will not be multiple choice. As for White Tiger, no, you don't need to know. Well, you obviously need to know a little something about the plot of White Tiger, but only in order to understand the book. But for White Tiger, you need to focus on metaphors, for example. What are the metaphors used in the book, and what do they represent? There's lots of them in the book, and your task is to figure out what they represent. Jay, regarding the importance of each part of the test, you're not going to be able to pass the test if you skip one of the elements. You need to have a decent understanding of all of the elements in order to pass. So I can't tell you which one is more important, because they're not equally important, because some parts are just considered, well, there's just more questions on some parts than on others, but all parts are equally important in the sense that you can't pass without studying all of them. Questions such as wat is belangrijk is something that I'm not going to answer, because that would mean that I'm sort of indicating what it is that you need to study, and you need to study all of it, otherwise we wouldn't be testing you. And if I tell you what's important and what's not important, I'm basically just telling you what we will be testing you on, and I'm not doing that. So if you have any specific questions, please let me know. And if not, then feel free to stick around and just listen. I'm not answering the wat is belangrijk questions. Wat mag je allemaal bij de toets houden? You can use both books, of course, so your novel of choice and White Tiger, and a dictionary, both English to Dutch and Dutch to English. If a character's personality is centered around his appearance, is it still not a character trait? Well, Freek, yes and no. But then the character traits, it should still be possible to pinpoint character traits. So, for example, if a person is very vain, then he's very focused on his looks and on his appearance. But being vain is not a physical trait. So, yes and no. You still have to list those character traits, though. Kan je een voorbeeld geven van falling action? In my class, I discussed Little Red Riding Hood door Roodkapje. And the minute Little Red Riding Hood is saved by the huntsman, all sorts of other stuff how should I put it? There's other questions that are answered. So what becomes of the wolf? He dies in some versions of the story. They turn him into a piece of carpet. and Little Red Riding Hood has learned his lesson. So it's everything that every part of the story that has to come to an end in order for the story to end. In case of the Hunger Games, it's the fact that Katniss and Peeta survive, but then they have to go back home, and there's this entire journey that they have to make, and all these new impressions that they get, and these questions that are left, that up until that point were left unanswered, will be answered for the reader. So it's everything that happens between the climax and the end of the story, and then there's a resolution in which you have to figure out as a reader how the main characters changed as compared to the exposition, because that's what a book is mostly about. How does the character change? And that's the resolution. Mila, yes, if you work your way through the novel of choice document, that should be okay. Hika, yes, every now and then you do have to use your novel of choice to quote parts of the book. Alicia, what background information are we talking about? Moeten we voorbeelden van round flat characters, moeten we de verschillen weten en de kenmerken bij de characters benoemen? Answering that question is telling you what the test is going to be like, so I can't answer that question. Rijn, we will definitely focus on themes and motives more than on characters and plot. That's what we use the novel of choice for, and then the White Tiger is a more, well, I'm not sure if it's in depth, but let's just put it that way, a more in-depth approach. Oh, that's interesting, Mila. I'll send you an email just now because that's fascinating. We'll find a solution. Moet je de antwoorden letterlijk kunnen reproduceren van de vragen plus antwoorden die we moeten leren uit algemeen, moet je globaal weten waar de tekst over gaat. A little bit of both. You need to have a decent understanding of the outline of the stories and the poems, but you also need to be able to analyze the poems in detail. However, if you were asked to analyze a specific part of the poem, a very specific part, then that part of the poem will be provided on the test. So then it's not a matter of knowing, but it's a matter of being able to use that knowledge. So then you don't need to know everything by heart, but you need to be able to apply that skill. I hope that answers your question. Preparing for the test regarding Alpen Magazine, my advice would be draw a timeline regarding what happened when, for the very simple reason that you get a clear overview of, well, what happened when, but you also get to categorize as you make that timeline, and you get to decide for yourself what's important enough to make it to the timeline, because obviously you can't write down everything that's in Alpine Magazine.
Hello.
Let's see. Perks of being a wallflower. So that is a interesting question to pose right now. Have you asked me that question before? Because that would have been convenient. Questions will be posed in English, but you can answer in Dutch. You can also answer in English, doesn't really matter as long as you stick to the language that you opt for right away. So if you start answering questions in Dutch, then stick to it. And if you answer them in English, you need to stick to it as well. Crystal, Perks of Being a Wallflower is on the list of books that you were provided with earlier this year, and that's available in the library. And the list indicates that it's a year 4 book. So I think that answers your question. The document in which the literary devices are listed is important in the sense that you need to be able to use that knowledge. So you need to, if you are asked to list a metaphor, for example, or an example of alliteration, you need to know what it is that we want you to do. Boy in a Striped Pajamas is definitely not a good idea because that's a book we read in year 3. And the book should say E3 on the back of your book. And E3 indicates that we read it in lower form. Freek, you need to be able to answer this question about it. We don't want you to know everything by heart. That's not what we're testing here. So, no, you're right. Just understand, make sure that you understand the poems and that you're able to answer some questions about them. You may not use post-its in your novel of choice. No, unfortunately. Alicia, regarding the authors, you need to be able to list those parts of his life or her life that affected their writing. So, for example, John Keats was hurt and was hurt by a woman. She broke his heart, and that led him to write La Belle Dame sans Merci. Crystal and Luna, I'm checking with Ron as we speak, so I'll get back to you within the next couple of minutes. Melissa, you only need to know how they died if it's relevant to their writing, and I don't think it is in this case. You need to know that his life was affected by it because at some point he wrote some very interesting stuff that's, well, some of the supernatural, because you're talking about Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and some of the stuff he wrote is characterized by the supernatural, and there's a very good chance that he wrote that kind of stuff whilst, I don't know, hallucinating or whilst being affected by the drugs that he used. Outsiders is okay, Kim. That's a year 5 book. Crystal, no, you don't have to be able to analyze the Alchemy magazine texts in terms of plot structure, because to poems, for example, that plot structure doesn't apply. Niels, yes. Mila, your question, you want to know what the background info is all about. That's the historical framework that we find ourselves in. So everything that the historical background that you need to know all about in order to understand what kind of transition England was going through at the time. So, for example, after the 60s in the 17th century, so 1665, for example, and 1666, when a very large part of London burned down and London was affected by the Black Plague and the Dutch invaded London, those events affected the people, and it caused chaos in England and in Great Britain as well. And so the chaos that was caused affected the type of literature that was produced at the time. And so that's the type of background information that you need to know all about. So what was going on in England at the time that affected literature. Haven't I uploaded the answers to? I don't think so. It's a fair question, viewer. I'll post them right now. I know that I posted some of them earlier on because they're in the presentation, but I guess not all answers have been provided. Riches of Madison County. I don't know. It's not listed in the E4 list. So I don't know. I have no experience with the book whatsoever. I haven't read it myself. Antoinette, the questions on the test will be slightly less specific, but not all too much. So it's pretty similar. The Chosen is okay, Tess. It's a year 5 book. Crystal, yes. The names of the authors are important. Yeah. You need to link the authors to their works. Not as in that's not one of the assignments. Bridges of Madison County is a no-go because that's chick lit, and we want you to read adult literature, young adult literature. Misha, we will not be asking you to tell us anything about the author. So that was just to get you going and to introduce you to the book and to the assignments, I guess. Mace, what's your question? Antoinette, if the question is very specific, so if we ask you to list certain elements from a sentence, then yes, you will be provided with the poem, but you also need to know the general outline of a story. So, for example, the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, you need to be able to tell me that the mariner was that he crossed 3 men who were on their way to a wedding, and that's when he started to tell them his story. And then you need to know what the story was about. You don't need to know what words were used, but you do need to be able to reproduce the general outline of the story. But if the question is very specific, then yes, the poem will be provided. Selection by Kira Cass is a year 4 book. This list with books and the years for which we consider them suitable is available in the library, boys and girls. So it would have been convenient to check this list before. If you're asked to do so, then yes. You don't have to come up with these things yourself. No. If you're asked to name a metaphor, then you do have to figure out what a metaphor is all by yourself. The description of such terminology is not provided on the test. apart from the fact that it's one day from the test, it's not very well timed, because you were asked to pick these books, I think, by the end of term 1. So, well, you get my point. Yeah, you can try using those sources, Freek, but there's a couple of things that will pose a problem here. The first is that the quality of the materials on scholier.com is not, it's not all that good. It's but mostly just rubbish. And second of all, if you haven't read the book yourself, you don't have a thorough understanding of the story, and therefore you will not be able to answer the questions. And even if you are able to answer the questions, I'm usually very good at analyzing whether or not you've understood it, and therefore whether or not you've read it. So use some resources. Using resources is okay, but don't use scholier.com, and only use them to back up what you already know, rather than to back up nothing. Well, to save your grade here, because that's just not going to work. Yes, Antoinette, you need to know a little some. Those pages are indicated on the list of pages that you need to study. So yes, and because it's relevant, because you need to know what England was going through at the time and what led to a certain development in literature or in theatre. So, for example, when Oliver Cromwell decided to abolish theatre, all theatres were closed and nobody was performing any plays anymore. It really affected the quality of English theatre at the time, and it took a while for somebody to reinstall the quality of English theatre. Since William Shakespeare, after he died, the next big playwright was Oscar Wilde, and that's quite a transition, considering the fact that Oscar Wilde was born in the 19th century. You don't need to know anything about him, but my point is, you need to know what happened in England at the time in order to understand what movement in England was based on these developments. Same goes for the fact that England was going through the Industrial Revolution, and that this affected literature to a very large extent. Moet je dingen weten zoals dat Charles I de zoon van James VI was. It's a tricky question, because I do want you to know what happened in England at the time and why things were so turbulent, so chaotic. But I don't think so. No. Should be okay without that knowledge. This could be important for you to this could be something you might want to take a look at. Do you have any more questions, ladies and gentlemen? Now, you need to know a little bit more than that, Craig. Because you also need to know that religion played a part in that. And obviously, you need to know that Charles I was Charles II's father, but that kind of makes sense. But you need to know that Prince Edward. Yeah, but what do you want me to? No, I'm not going to take you through all the slides because there's a large number of my own pupils watching this live stream right now, and they've seen me present these slides twice. And therefore, if I do that now, I will not be able to answer any more questions, and they're very self-explicant. So if you have a look at these slides, then you should be able to figure out what was going on. And if you don't have any access to the slides, then ask your friends from. I'm not presenting anything that's not listed in Alcuin magazine, so it's not information that anybody else couldn't have had access to. So no, I'm not going to take you through the slides. Rape of the Lock. No, we didn't really focus on that in class. I was just checking whether the answers to the text were there, and they are part of the presentation. So we didn't discuss it in class, but you did. It was part of your homework. Rape of the Lock is a very weird story. It's a story about a man who falls in love with a woman, and because he can't have her, the thing that the next best thing that he can get is a piece of her hair. So the lock is a part of just a string of her hair, and it's a burlesque, which means that it's very exaggerated and it's not to be taken seriously. And what the author did at the time is he wrote this poem in order to reconcile two families that he actually knew, but it didn't work. Because the story is about two families: the family of the man who took the piece of the string of hair, and the family of the woman to whom this hair belongs, and they end up in a fight over just a lock of her hair. So that's the ridiculous part of it, and you need to know that it's a burlesque. The woman's name is Belinda, by the way, and it's like I said, it's very exaggerated. It's very over the top, which is characteristic to a burlesque poem. Freek, yes, the PowerPoint presentation does not contain all the information. It's a good summary, but it definitely does not contain all the information, and parts of it are not in the presentation as was announced. So you had to choose between Gulliver's Travels and Robinson Crusoe, and these texts were deliberately not discussed in class. You have to figure out that bit by yourself. So no, the presentation will not be sufficient. Henry VIII is not playing any part in our current time frame because his time frame, well, he belonged to the late Middle Ages. So no. Rape of the Lock. As I think you know, rape means to sexually assault someone, but back in the days, rape also meant theft. So to steal something. So rape of the lock means that, yeah, well, thank you, Daniel. Here in the answers, there's a little something about that fact. The first question is probably related to the title. Rape suggests a serious crime. Lock, on the other hand, is unexpected and entirely trivial. This is a strange combination of words, therefore. So the seriousness of the crime and the seriousness with which the family deals with this crime is represented in the title, because it's not all that serious. I mean, yes, it's very strange and not okay, but the family demands, for example, that he returns the lock to this woman, even though there's nothing left for her to do with that. I mean, she can't reattach it to her hair, so it's a bit of a strange situation. Crystal's right, you don't need to know any specific dates. Niels, wat veranderde aan Balram's kijk op politiek gedurende het boek? It's a very interesting question. And that's a question, I've got a question for you in return. What is the, if you had to list one word that you link to politics in India as described by Balram, what would it be? So one word that you could link to politics in India as described by Balram. Yes, corrupt or corruption. Very good. And in the beginning of the book and in the beginning of the story, how corrupt do you think Balram is? For example, when he's a kid and he's an excellent student and all that, and when he starts to work as a sweetmaker, how corrupt is he really? It's a question that I'm asking you right now. How corrupt is Balram at the beginning of the book? No, you're absolutely right, Niels. He isn't, or not really. I mean, he might be just a little bit, but no, it's not corruption. It's just being a child and trying to do the best you can and making mistakes in the process of doing so. And then my next question, of course, is how corrupt is he at the end of the book, and what events, what situations in the book can you think of that prove whether or not he's corrupt? Because the answer isn't all that simple. I'll give you part of the answer. Part of the answer is he is corrupt, but then again, he isn't. Why? What proof do we have for that? He is, but then again, he isn't, and then again, he is. I'm not making this any easier for you right now, but think about it. Oh, that's a very interesting thing. He killed his master, Mr. Ashok, yes, and he's, I'm not sure if he thinks that's a good thing, but he's trying to convince himself that it's not a crime, that he didn't have a choice. What about his family? And what about, there's why did he kill his master? Victoria, you don't need to be able to list them chronologically, but I would advise you to study it that way, because that makes it easy for you to remember what was going on, and upon making a timeline you have to figure out what details are important and what details aren't. So you don't have to be able to list them chronologically, but I would advise you to study it that way. As for Balram in the White Tiger, what reason does Balram have to kill his master? No, that's not it. He has to kill his master for a different reason. Can anyone help Niels out? Ja, Christel, je moet kiezen tussen de teksten. Je bepaalt van tevoren welke je voorbereidt. En ook op de toets kun je dan kiezen. Dus dan beantwoord je of de vragen over Gulliver's Travels, of je beantwoordt de vragen over Robinson Crusoe. Dat geef je aan en dan krijg je daar punten voor. Joris, that is part of it, yes. It's eat or be eaten. But that's still not what I'm referring to. Why did he have to kill his master? What would have happened if he hadn't killed his master? What was his master accusing him of? Yes, Marus. He had to sign a contract or a statement stating that he had killed somebody. But had he killed someone? And Melissa, it's not about going to jail that's relevant here, because yeah, Thijs, you're absolutely right. And so is Sander. How is that event related to another event later on in the book? Very good. You're absolutely right, Luke. And that's what I wanted to mention regarding Niels's question, because he asked me how does his political his view on politics, how does it change? And initially, he has to take the blame for something that he didn't do. And then in the end, when, like Dine says, one of his drivers kills someone, he decides to take the blame. So he appears not to be corrupt, but then what happens at the police station? And I'm going to leave you with that question, because that's a bit of research you have to do yourself. And that's it. We've run out of time. Please do let me know if this was helpful, whether or not you would like this to be one of the options next year. And if you run into any questions, send me an email. I'll try to answer them tonight. Oh, Crystal. Crystal, I haven't got an answer yet. I know that in Sarah's group, it was not allowed to be read because it's on the list of books that we read in year 4. I'll try to reach out to Ron, considering the fact that I don't think you've got an alternative. Stick to it and we'll figure out what to do with that. So yeah, as soon as I get a response from Ron, I'll let you know. Okay, thank you very much. Like I said, please let me know whether or not you thought this was useful through the chat function, and good luck preparing for the test. Thank you very much, boys and girls.